So this could possibly be the weirdest case we have ever covered. It involves religious cults, child abuse, and it was all found out by somebody checking a baby monitor. This is a Kurim case. Welcome to Enter the Dark. Hello and welcome to Enter the Dark. I am Jan. With me as always is Les. You alright?
All good, mate. All good.
Good. It's been a long day. You may have seen... this has been months. We've recorded 4 episodes in a day, haven't we?
Yeah,
hence we haven't changed clothes.
We haven't changed. We're not being disgusting. We've been here literally all day.
Like 6 hours so far.
Yeah.
And this is the last one we're doing, but we've left the best till last. Leslie's got the beer, so because I told him he would need to drink after this one. But yeah, this is the Kurim case. You've not heard of this one, have you?
Not heard of this one. This one's a new one on me.
Do you know what isn't new on you?
Mm-hmm.
Our Patreon supporters who give us enough money to say their names, and they are Hannah Blue Harrington, Amanda Champagne, Storia Crowley, Amy Emmer and Jet Coleman, Lisa Dempsey, Marie T. Jensen, Casey the Cannibal, Becky Louise, Izzy from the Clink, Jules Henderson, Michelle Hudson, Alicia Llewellyn, Mandy Madden, Fire Pixie, Little Mascara, Elle, Swiss Phil, Krista, Elizabeth Lee, Kooky Fenner, and Verena Schmidt. Welcome all. Thank you for giving us your money. If you guys want to support us, the best thing you can do for no money is just subscribe, hit the like button now and just leave a comment saying that you think we're cool. And but if you do want to give us money, just go to www.patreon.com/enterthedark. Anything from $1 all the way up to $50. You can give as much as you want. You get free shit. It's cool. But Les, now this is going to be a long one because there's a lot of
moving parts. Lots of moving parts, is there?
Yeah, and the way it starts off, you think you know where it's going, and it doesn't end like that. Okay, so are you ready for this?
Ready.
Right, let's fucking do it. So then, right, this story takes place in Kurim, which is a small town in the southern Moravia region with a population of around 10,000. Now, the town is situated 9 miles northwest of Brno, which is the second largest city in the Czech Republic. And on May the 7th, Edward Turdy was testing a new video baby monitor while his wife was in labour. Now, he turned on the monitor and he didn't see the interior of his own house when he set the camera up, but witnessed a strange image. It was a small naked boy, he thought was around 6 or 7 years old, playing with a roll of electrical tape in what appeared to be a small dimly lit room. Now, the boy seemed happy and was engaging in the play, and he just assumed that the monitor was picking up a signal from a nearby device of the same type, and he didn't think it was anything to do with abuse, right? Now, later that day, he tried the monitor again and saw a more concerning scene. The same boy was being fed torn pieces of bread by a woman who was out of view, but whose voice Turdy did not recognise. It was at this point that he noticed the boy's bound hands and began to suspect that something was wrong. After visiting his wife and child in the hospital at 5 p.m. that evening, he turned on the monitor again and saw the same boy in the same room. However, the situation had worsened. The boy was still tied up and he was eating what appeared to be vomit off the floor. Now, he was concerned for the boy's safety and he decided to inform the police and recorded the footage in case the feed was lost before they arrived. Now, when the police got there, they looked at the footage and decided to knock on the doors of the local houses, as the monitors only have a short range, so he must be close by. However, none of the neighbours admitted to having a small boy in a dark room tied up on their property when questioned, because you wouldn't.
You wouldn't know. No.
But one of the doors they knocked on belonged to Clara Morova, a 29-year-old woman who had moved in 6 months earlier. Now, Clara was a reclusive woman who had hardly been seen by her neighbours since moving to Kurim. Now, when asked if there was a little boy in the house, she denied it and claimed that her only child was a 13-year-old daughter, Anicka, who was ill and did not want anyone in the house. As the police had no proof, they left. Luckily, Edward was still monitoring and recording the situation with his video baby monitor. After he heard the conversation between Gregor and Clara, he immediately replayed the footage for Gregor when he returned. They then returned to the house, which was now considered an active crime scene, and Gregor and his 2 colleagues began to investigate. Now, as the police searched the ground floor, they heard a loud scream coming from upstairs. The girl who Clara claimed was her daughter was making the noise. Now, the police soon found a padlocked door what appeared to lead to a small closet or a small room under the staircase. Now, when they asked Clara to open the door, she refused, claiming that the landlord had never given her the key. Now, the fire department was called out to cut the lock, but Clara called her sister Katerina, and together with Anicka, they obstructed the firefighters from accessing the room. Now, Anicka, who everyone called Anna, behaved like a much younger child. She crawled on all fours, babbled and rocked herself like a toddler.
What the fuck?
The police began to move Clara and Katerina by force, and although they made a few attempts to resist, they were quickly overpowered. Anna, on the other hand, put up a fight. She kicked, hit and scratched at officers, but the police officers did not respond to her aggression in kind, as she was a child and also not black or American. They assumed that she was trying to defend her mother. Once they separated her, she ran crying, "Mama, Mama!" but not to her supposed mother, but to her aunt, Katerina. Now, the firefighters cut away the lock and opened the door, and the first thing that hit everyone at the scene was the overwhelming stench of vomit, human excrement and dried urine covering the bare concrete floor. The room was small and sweltering, and in the centre of the filth sat a small, pale, naked figure, the little boy from Edward Turdy's baby monitor. Now, Clara identified him as her son Andre, but when questioned about why she was keeping him in such squalor, she responded with, "You don't understand. You can't possibly understand." Now, Katerina offered a partial explanation, claiming that the little room under the stairs reminded Andre of Harry Potter's cupboard under the stairs and become his favourite play spot. However, there was no explanation given for why he was bound, naked, and living in his own excrement for months. Even J.K. Rowling didn't write that. Andre was taken away in an ambulance and initially appeared calm, not acting like a child who'd just been rescued from a horrific situation. However, his psychological trauma soon began to surface. He became extremely fearful and began to see ghosts in the pictures on the walls, causing the images to be removed. He woke up screaming from nightmares. While nurses tried to console him, he pleaded, "Just kill me. Please just kill me." Now, upon examination, physical marks that appeared to have been deliberately inflicted were visible on Andre. He had long scars on his arms and back that could have been the result of a sharp object cuts, pale welts in his groins, and large circular scar on his buttocks. Andre had an older brother named Jacob who was 2 years older than him. During the police raid, Jacob had been at school, and Andre had been diagnosed with hearing problems, which made learning in a classroom environment difficult for him. Hence, he was pulled out of school to be homeschooled by his mother, Clara. With his mother in police custody, Jacob was taken to the Brno Children's Institution, followed soon by Anicka. Now, the authorities needed to get any information from Jacob that could explain the situation at home. Now, at first, he refused to speak and avoided eye contact. However, upon examination, his body also had scars similar to Andre. Now, Jacob initially claimed that the scars were from scratches caused by a pet gerbil, and the welts in his groin were from wasp stings he'd received while camping.
Pretty big fucking gerbils and
I
wasps.
fucking know, yeah. Imagine that size of that bastard gerbil. Even Richard Gere won't let that up his arse.
It wouldn't, would
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
However, neither explanation seemed plausible, and when caregivers gently pressed him for the truth, he finally revealed that they had been inflicted by his mother. The scratches were from a fork being dragged forcefully against his skin, and the welts were from cigarettes being put out on him and his younger brother's groin. He'd said that his mother had never been a smoker, and she had brought the cigarettes only for the purpose of burning with them. Now, as a few days passed, the boys began to reveal more and more about what had happened. According to Andre, the confinement had begun near the end of the previous summer when the family had moved into the Kurim house in December 2006. He had initially been confined to the bathroom before being transferred to the understairs closet where he had remained a prisoner. He had eaten in darkness and been forced to use a bucket for urinating and defecating. He had only been in the living room once, on Christmas Day. Both boys mentioned a third adult whom they referred to as Aunt Nenchi, with whom they had frequent contact. According to Jacob, Aunt Nenchi worked at a daycare centre where both he and Andre had attended. She also walked him to and from school. Andre claimed to have been confined to a room at the said daycare centre before the move to Kurim, during which time Aunt Nenshi had watched over him and given him food. Further investigation revealed that Aunt Nenshi was actually Hanna Besova, a social worker and colleague of Katerina. The daycare centre, which was called Prapsker, meaning light beam, was where the two had been working together. I just want to apologise right now to the one person I know who watches this from the Czech Republic, Adela. I'm sorry for these pronunciations. The police brought Besova in for questioning and she denied any wrongdoing. When the alleged confinement at the daycare centre was brought up, she explained it as a misunderstanding on Andre's part. Now, she said he described as punishment room where children were sent for a time-out when they misbehaved, which had been exaggerated by his young mind. Now, despite the lack of probable cause, hard evidence or reliable testimony, the police had to release Katerina due to legal constraints. In the meantime, the two boys had begun to open up slowly, but Anna's case was more challenging. Now, Anna appeared to have developmental challenges which were particularly distressed by the separation from her adopted mother. She would react violently, biting and screaming whenever anyone tried to touch her, making it difficult for social workers to approach her. Although social workers believed Anna had scars similar to her siblings, they couldn't confirm this due to her behaviour. Now, to give Anna time to adjust, social workers left her be for a while before attempting to examine her or give her a bath. Fortunately, 3 days after the raid, Anna had disappeared from the institution. It appeared that she had climbed out of a window, but it was unclear whether or not she had done it alone or with help. So let's just time out there for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a guy turning on a video baby monitor, seeing a kid in a room eating his own vomit, being forced. The police going in. He's trapped naked in a room. You've got a developmentally challenged 13-year-old acting like a toddler. None of them will let him open the door. The guy at school, they've got scratches and cigarette burns all over him, and she's just escaped. At the moment, where's your mind on this? Where do you think it's going?
I think there's a religious dynamic. I mean, you said there was a religious dynamic to this.
Yeah, so that's...
So, like, not an odd guess, but, like, I'd say the injuries in particular sound religiously motivated. Possibly. I'm starting to wonder, that maybe the guy with the baby monitor has got something to do with this.
He hasn't.
He's not?
No.
No, that was just
he just literally blew this case wide open.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we all hear them stories. It's almost like an urban myth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, about, like, people picking up weird shit on baby monitors and stuff. But, like, the video ones, I mean, the fact that it picked that up.
Yeah.
Which would show that there's some sort of surveillance going on in is it the Kurim house?
Yeah, they had a baby monitor camera in there so they could see what he was doing, like the kid was doing.
Yeah. So it's yeah.
Okay, so
okay.
Les hasn't got translated. He hasn't got a fucking clue. The authorities initiated a search which included infrared goggles, the K9 unit, and DNA analysis of clothing items. However, the search failed to locate Anna, and door-to-door inquiries in the surrounding neighbourhoods proved fruitless. The possibility that she had been aided in her escape by an adult became more and more likely. You disgusting animal.
That's just come up, man. Yeah, I've been good all day. Like 6 hours. I know.
Yeah, you've not drunk for 6 hours. Well done.
It's my first day off work.
To better understand the situation, it's necessary to examine the family's history. Now, Ladislav and Eliska Mirova were the parents of Katerina, Gabriela and Clara. Now, they were a closely knit family who enjoyed spending time together, going on outings, vacations, and often included extended family members. Now, they were moderately religious Catholics who attended church occasionally, and they raised their children based on the principles of the Ten Commandments and the Golden Rule. Now, growing up, the sisters were close friends. Katerina and Gabriela enjoyed reading and were academically inclined, while Clara was more active and participated in sports such as volleyball and gymnastics and synchronized swimming. At the age of 18 in 1996, Clara had become pregnant with Radek Kufal, whom she had been dating for a year. After discovering the pregnancy, the couple married and had their first child, Jacob, in October of 1997. 2 years later, in September of 1999, they had their second child, Andre. Now, despite the unexpected pregnancy, Ladislav and Anicka were supportive of their daughter and offered all the help that they could. They allowed Clara and Kufal to live with them for the first year of their marriage until they could afford their own apartment. With the family support, Clara earned a degree in economics and pursued a career as a secretary. However, Clara's marriage to Kufal began to crumble in 2003, with neighbours reporting heated arguments between the couple. The disagreements escalated until the relationship reached its breaking point, and Kufal moved out by the end of the year, initiating divorce proceedings. Despite the divorce, the boys remained in the custody of their mother, and Kufal continued to play an active role in their lives. He had the utmost faith in Clara's abilities as a mother. Now, in 2005, Clara surprised her family and neighbours by adopting a daughter, Anicka. Now, Clara had never mentioned her desire to adopt, and no one had ever heard anything about the long and complex legal process that she's had to go through. Now, neighbours occasionally caught glimpses of Anicka, a pale and sickly child who seemed unable to navigate stairs and was often carried up and down. Her arrival coincided with a change in Clara's behaviour as she became increasingly unavailable and refused company at her flat, always appearing exhausted and unhappy. Now, after assuming the role of primary caregiver for Anicka, Clara and Anicka developed a close bond. Clara sought out her sister Katerina for guidance and childcare, and when they moved to Kurim, Katerina moved in with them. Clara regularly spent time with Katerina after that. As the investigation continued, Anna's behaviour drew attention. Following the discovery of Andre's situation, caregivers provided Anna with a paper and a pencil to calm down. To their surprise, Anna drew binary strings, a calculus formula, and a tesseract, showcasing her advanced abilities.
Wait, what the fuck?
After Anna's photo was released, Katerina's colleagues noticed a resemblance between Anna and a former colleague of hers, Barbora Skrlová. Katerina had hired Barbara to work at a daycare centre, but she had stopped working there due to illness. When asked about Anna's true identity, Katerina denied that Anna was Barbara, insisting that she knew them as separate people. The public became intrigued by Anna's mysterious origins, and a national tabloid offered a reward for information about her whereabouts. A private TV station even brought in a psychic to help locate her.
I love it when they do shit like that.
Didn't work. Meanwhile, in Kernov, where Anna was said to have originated, doubts about her identity led to the hopes of solving of a decade-old mystery. In 1996, Yaroslav Sisalov was convicted of murdering his 4-year-old daughter Karolina while spending time with her. He claimed that he'd been knocked unconscious while driving and that Karolina had disappeared, but the courts found his explanation unconvincing. When Anna's identity was called into question, Bogdana, Karolina's mother, hoped that Anna might be her missing daughter. Although there were some inconsistencies with Anna's claimed age, it was still possible that she was Karolina. However, the mystery was eventually solved through DNA analysis. It was revealed that Anna, found in Katerina's house, was not the same person who had been present in the courtroom. The DNA sample taken during the adoption process did not match the one found in the institution.
Ooh, the plot fucking thickens. Oh, this is juicy.
So, Anna, at the moment, is missing. People are thinking she's this person, Barbora Skrlová, who used to work at the daycare centre.
Yeah.
This other person saying, this could be my murdered daughter.
Yeah.
And the DNA from her adoption at the court case doesn't match her DNA that they took at the hospital.
Right.
So, whoever the DNA was there
isn't the same person as he. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Once again, the public's imagination was filled with speculation. Was the girl in the courtroom actually the real Anna? And if so, what had happened to her? Could something terrible have occurred, such as an accidental death, prompting the Morova sisters to resort to desperate measures to conceal the fact? Was she still alive, hidden away and subject to unspeakable horrors? Meanwhile, investigators were pursuing a different angle in the case. They had discovered a connection between Katerina and Barbora Skrlová that went beyond just working and studying together. Barbara had been a member of a religious sect led by her father, Joseph Skrlová. and she had converted Katerina to its beliefs, possibly during their time at university. The investigators saw this connection as more than just coincidence and believed it had a lot to do with the case and the motives behind it. As a result, they looked into other members of the sect and their efforts paid off. A DNA sample taken in the courtroom belonged to the daughter of Victor Scala, an actor from Brno and a member of the sect. She had been presented to the court as Anna, eliminating any chance of the court finding anything suspicious. And from one suspicion that had seemed least likely was confirmed, the DNA sample was taken from the institution belonged to Barbora Skrlová.
Right, okay.
So Anna is
Barbora Skrlová.
Yeah. You can see why I said this one was the weirdest case ever. Now, after the abuse was revealed, the boy's family, who had previously been estranged from them, were eager to resume contact. During Andrei's initial hospital stay, his father, grandparents and Aunt Gabriella visited him, and he responded positively by sharing candy with them. Although Kufal wanted to regain custody of the boys, the institution's policies heavily restricted his access to them. Both he and the boys' grandparents attempted to resolve the situation through the courts, but a judge ruled that the institution had the authority to decide whether and when to release them. Kufal argued that their continued detention was illegal, but the Minister of Social Affairs had to waive parental rights in the interest of the children's well-being. Now, the institution's decision to revoke visitation rights with the boys was controversial, given that their behaviour with family members may have been a result of conditioning by their abusers. Additionally, the possibility that some family members may have been involved in the abuse added to the institution's wariness to allow visits. Now, during the adoption hearings, Anicka Morova, the boy's grandmother, had testified to the veracity of the story of Anna's origins and that was at least complicit in the deception. Although the court ruled that the institution had acted beyond its mandate by banning Kufal's visits completely, the decision on who would have the ultimate custody of the boys remained unresolved for another 4 years, long after all the perpetrators of the abuse had been exposed and brought to justice. On June the 11th, 2007, Anna Morova was officially declared non-existent by the law. No concrete evidence supported her existence, as no official documents backed it up. Although eyewitnesses claimed to have known her since 2003, they had not been able to study her closely. Furthermore, the person who had presented herself as Anna to the authorities was later identified as somebody else entirely. It was possible that Barbora Skrlová had managed to deceive law enforcement and childcare experts, as well as Clara's neighbours and family, while maintaining her true identity with colleagues. Now, after an extensive search for Barbora, she was still missing and had no clues surfaced regarding her whereabouts. However, a few days after Anna's official erasure, Barbora unexpectedly reappeared at the Czech embassy in Copenhagen, Denmark, which was approximately 480 miles away from Brno. She had been hiding in the city with her father, Josef Skrla, a lawyer named Zdeněk Hruzek, a former police chief officer named Josef Kalinski, and another man named Vladislav Ruzicka, all of whom were Czech nationals. Now, Barbora had been fearful of being sent back to the Czech Republic due to the possible repercussions of her proximity to the abuse, which is why she had been hiding. Her companions claimed that there was more to the story and asked people not to judge her without knowing all the facts. Now, Kalinski acted as Barbora's spokesperson for the press and confirmed that she had played the role of Anna, but her intentions were not malicious. She had assumed the persona because it allowed her to feel more comfortable in the skin of a child. She wanted to be among children, Kalinski explained, because she felt happiest and safest as a child. As an adult, no one took her seriously. People made fun of her and ridiculed her for acting like a child outwardly. Now, Barbora's behaviour at the embassy supported the story that she had created the persona of Anna to feel more comfortable. She exhibited childlike behaviour such as clutching at teddy bear and begging her father for ice cream or cake from bakery they passed. However, Kalinski provided few details about her escape from the institution, only revealing she had hidden in the woods for a while before leaving the country by train. It was unclear how she had crossed multiple national borders without a passport or who had assisted her during her escape. Now, since Barbora was not a wanted person at the time, the embassy was unable to detain her. She and her companions provided a hair sample for DNA testing and promised to remain in contact and cooperate with authorities. A few days later, Barbara contacted Czech media and expressed her willingness to cooperate with authorities and testify on every detail she knew. Now, she provided new insights into how she had developed the persona of Anna, which she began when she worked at the daycare centre with her friend Katerina. She created the persona as a way to fit in with the children, as her behaviour often aligned more with someone closer to their age than as an adult. Barbara's discomfort in her own identity worsened when she sought psychological help, but it was unsuccessful. As a desperate last resort, Katerina had offered to help her assume a new identity. So, Barbara claimed the entire adoption process had only involved her, and Victor Scarla's daughter had only been brought in for the DNA test. She underwent psychiatric evaluations by several experts, all of whom believed she was 13 years old, with one even speculating that she could have been 11 or 12. She presented this as evidence as her age dysmorphia was real and that she could not have been pretending. During an interview a few days later, she referred to herself as Barbara in the third person, indicating some kind of latent disassociation. So Barbara stated that her father knew little about the deception and was not involved in it in any way. When asked if she'd received assistance during the escape from the institution, she refused to provide any information. She explained that Andre's incarceration had only occurred once, on the day of the raid, and they had not been in the closet for more than 2 hours in total. She also claimed that after receiving corporal punishment, Andre had threatened to kill both her and his brother Jacob, and Clara had put him in the closet to cool down and make it clear that such behaviour was not acceptable in their home.
Don't threaten to kill us, or you're going in the choky.
I mean, it's like Ed Kemper's mum, innit, when she made him sleep in the basement because she was like, he's going to kill us. I mean, she was right, though.
She was.
Also, that doesn't explain why there was loads of months-old's shit
and vomit
in there. Yeah. Attempts to schedule an interview with Hruzik came to nothing, and soon he dropped out of contact completely, evading any attempts to re-establish communication. Barbara had once again disappeared, managing to elude the authorities. Now, before Barbara's reappearance and subsequent disappearance, the name Joseph Skrla had been mentioned as a person of interest due to his paternal connection to her. Skrla had an intriguing past. In his youth, he had been injured by a fall down a flight of stairs and had received disability benefit payments for most of his life. However, he embarked on a career in business, though most of his commercial dealings seemed to be shrouded in secrecy and dishonesty. He was a skilled salesman, able to persuade people to invest in his schemes, which often yielded little or no return. It was unclear what he traded in, but it appeared to be connected to international intelligence and military goods. One of his alleged clients was the government of Azerbaijan, and he had almost caused an international incident when the relationship fell apart. In the late 1990s, Skrla had offered to sell several tanks to the Azerbaijani military, but the offer was declined.
Oh.
Now, after threatening to sell tanks to Armenia, Azerbaijan's rival country, Skrla disappeared and was later found in Denmark with Barbara. Prior to this, Skrla had led a religious sect, which was a splinter group of the Grail Movement.
The Grail Movement?
Yes, the Grail. You know the Grail Movement. Have you heard of them?
I've heard of them. I don't know much about them, but I'm just like, I'm guessing something to do with like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that sort of shit.
This is a splinter group, so this is like a radicalised version of it. So, members of the sect included Skrla's daughter Clara, Victor Skrla, and Hanna Bezova, who was implicated in the abuse according to Jacob and Andre's testimonies. Interestingly, Skrla had recruited members for his sect through a scout troop he had led in the 1990s called Maravenji. The Grail Movement is a unique religious organisation that's based on the publication In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message, written by Oscar Ernst Bernhard in 1926. Now, initially, it was a messianic movement centred around Bernhard, who went by the name of Abderushin and claimed to be the Son of Light or Son of the Holy Spirit. Currently, the movement has around 10,000 members globally, give or take, with local circles functioning mostly independently. Now, despite Bernhardt's claims, he did not assume the role of the movement's central authority, and after his death in 1941, the movement's message was revised to reduce its messianic aspects. So the Grail Movement had a diverse reputation in the Czech Republic. with some followers such as Jan Dvorsky claiming to be the promised reincarnation of Parsifal Emmanuel to complete the unfinished work.
Like so the myth of Parsifal.
Yeah.
Or like he's the one who finds the Grail. Parsifal, the Fisher King, and things like that.
Yeah. So Dvorsky wrote his own supplement to the creed, the Son of Man, the Messiah's living world for the restoration of mankind, and his followers were commonly known as Emmanuelite or Emmanuelites. Now, the movement's spiritual centre remains in Vompenberg, Austria, and the Bernhardt family estate, where initiates go on pilgrimages to be baptised. The mainstream Grail movement rejected Dvorsky, but his book gained popularity and he amassed a small following who corresponded with him by mail. At the suggestion of a clairvoyant he trusted, Joseph Klimes, also known as Mr. Vidon, Dvorsky and his wife established a compound in northern Italy named The City. It's a shit name, isn't it?
It is. The City.
The City.
The State.
It's like San Francisco. They don't like to be called SF or San Fran. They like to be called The City. It's a bit shit, isn't it? Which was to be the centre of the future heavenly kingdom. Why would you... The City. Call it a different name. Klimes predicted widespread global disasters that would precede the end of the world, prompting many people to seek refuge in the city. Now, some followers abandoned their lives to get to the city before the prophesied disasters occurred. However, they found a totalitarian microstate where Dvorsky's word was law. Purity tests were common, and many were expelled, particularly at Klimes' insistence. The clairvoyant conducted psychic readings and expelled those with bad auras. Many of those expels were devout believers and were devastated at being cast out of the company of the righteous. 10 former members reportedly attempted to starve themselves to death in the mountains around the city, hoping to hasten their reincarnation into purer vessels. Fucking morons.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the prophesied disasters failed to occur, and some members left voluntarily. However, Dvorsky continued to expel those who remained, and only his family stayed in the city. In total, around 60 people cycled through the city, but no more than 15 were ever present at any one time. In 1995, Dvorsky and his wife were charged with parental neglect for denying their children access to education. That summer, the entire family went into hiding and nothing has been heard of them since.
Okay.
As a result of this unfortunate event, the Emmanuelite were identified as one of Czech Republic's most dangerous groups, and the mainstream Grail movement's reputation was tarnished by Dvorsky. Now, the involvement of members of Skrlov's groups in the Kurim case threatened to be a public relations disaster of even greater magnitude. Artur Zatulkal, leader of the movement in the Czech Republic, was quick to disavow Skrlov and his followers, stating that they had separated 11 years earlier due to unspecified differences in doctrine. Now, the investigators determined that understanding of the mainstream Grail movement could help them comprehend Skrlov's sect's behaviour. The Grail message believers are known to collaborate with one another, and the investigators suspected that additional sect members were involved in the abuse besides Clara and Katerina. However, despite being detained separately, the two women did not provide any information about the involvement of others. Now, to uncover more information, the investigators conducted a series of raids on members of Skrlov's sect, hoping to find evidence related to the abuse of Jacob and Andre and the creation of Barbora as Anna. But during the raids, they discovered medical documents containing false diagnoses for serious illnesses, including leukemia and various cancers, for children who had attended the daycare centre where Katerina and Hanna Bazova worked, and where Barbara had worked in the past. The names were real, but the diagnoses were fabricated. Now, medical experts confirmed that the forgeries were based on a source with professional medical knowledge, but contained technical errors that indicated the person who created them was not an oncologist with full knowledge of the correct terminology. While investigators considered other hypotheses, such as false insurance claims for treatment, they found no evidence of fraud. The documents were similar to those used by Clara and Katerina to support Anna's background story and contained similar errors, suggesting that they had the same or similar origin. This confirmed the connection between the splinter sect and the creation of Anna, and it strengthened the case that there is a connection with the abuse as well. Now, social workers and caregivers worked with Jacob and Andre to elicit more information. They identified 2 other male adults involved in the abuse is Jan Skrlová and Jan Turek. There's lots of Jans in this.
So Jans, you're a Jan.
I am. Also, I want to know that Bella Fiore, the true crime woman who covered this, she managed to do it in 20 minutes. I don't know how. I think she missed out on a lot of information.
She tried.
Like most of them do. Both men...
that was a side swipe.
It's not really. They just don't give all the information, do they? Both men had connections with other abusers and persons of interest, and had part-time at Katerina's daycare centre and been member of the Ant Scout Club.
Right, okay.
Now, Jan Turek was arrested for causing grievous bodily harm on September the 8th, 2008, shortly after his complicity was established. However, the younger Skrlová and Hanna Basova remained free for several months as the boys' testimony was deemed insufficient to bring proceedings against them immediately. With the revelation of two further suspects, Jakub and Andrei's testimony finally revealed the complete horrific details of the abuse they had suffered at the hands of their mother and her accomplices. Now, the abuse began suddenly in the summer of 2006, with Clara showing no previous tendency towards violence or abuse. The abuse was intense and brutal, leaving the boys in shock and unable to process what was happening to them. The family, including Clara, Katerina and Anna, were taken to a cottage in Vyverska Bietska, joined later on by Hanna Basova, Jan Skrlová and Jan Turek. Now, instead of a regular family holiday outdoors, as they had previously enjoyed, this trip had a darker purpose. Waiting for them at the cottage were two dog cages into which they were forced and forbidden from communicating with each other. They were treated as though they were animals, being fed from drug bowls and only taken out of their cages, the most brutal forms of abuse. Their torturers would put bags over their heads, beat them with belt buckles and bamboo poles, scratch them with forks, and even burn them with cigarettes on their genitals. Hot water would be poured over their abdomens, causing excruciating pain that fortunately didn't result in permanent damage. Andrei in particular was singled out for the worst of the torture, including having his head held underwater in a bucket and having a piece of flesh cut from his buttock that was passed around and eaten by the adults present.
What the fuck? So now we've got like cannibalism into the mix.
The abuse was not just physical but also psychological, with children forced to memorise vulgar words and phrases, listening to unsettling music like Ed Sheeran, and inflicting harm on each other. I've got to chuck jokes in every now and again because this is fucking dark as fuck. They were even made to dig shallow graves and lie in them while they were being told repeatedly that they were dead. Their heads were covered so they couldn't see who was tormenting them, but they could hear their taunts and jeers of their abusers. When Jakub returned to the school after the summer, the noticeable change in his demeanour did not go unnoticed. He missed a total of 214 hours of school and avoided swimming practices, nature outings, and even a class trip to the Beskid Mountains. This was likely because he didn't want to see anyone to see him unclothed or question the marks on his body. Meanwhile, Andrei was diagnosed with a fake hearing problem and homeschooled while chained to a desk in the basement of the Beam Daycare Centre. He was under the watchful eye of Hanna Basova, who occasionally beat him and was forced to urinate in a bucket and defecate in the bathroom in the middle of the night. He was only released periodically for exercise. Eventually, Clara secured a lease for the Kurim house, and Andrei was transferred to the understair closet, where he remained until his rescue, thanks to a malfunctioning baby monitor discovered by Edward Turdy.
Jesus, just...
I know, right?
Someone was looking out for that kid.
Yeah.
Like, in a weird way. I mean,
it's
a few years, well, months or so too fucking late. But Jesus.
I mean, throughout this horrible experience, the children, they were coached on what to say if anyone asked about their abuse and warned not to reveal what was happening to them at home. Now, the revelation of Jakub and Andrei's complete suffering left the entire country in shock, disgust and horror, reigniting the question that had been asked from the beginning: why? Why were two innocent children subjected to such a terrible ordeal by those they trusted most? All evidence pointed to Joseph Skrlov's breakaway Grail Movement sect, as it had provided the network of support required to inflict the abuse. It It's also highly likely that a tenet of the doctrine followed by the sect had directly inspired the perpetrator's actions. So, 3 possible explanations have been proposed for the horrific abuse inflicted on Jacob and Andre. Now, the least malevolent hypothesis was that Clara and her accomplices abused the boys as a mean of discipline. Assuming Barbora Skrlová's explanation of wanting to fit in with her true self was accurate, and she had previously proposed during her brief reappearance in Copenhagen. Now, the Grail message, which Joseph Skirler's breakaway sect followed, advocates for a firm and strict approach to child rearing to raise righteous and upright adults. Now, it is possible that the sect took this philosophy to an extreme and monstrous level. Now, if Barbara's claims that the boys had become excessively unruly were true, possibly due to her taking up too much of her mother's attention, Katerina may have sought the sect's help to restore order. Now, the second hypothesis was based on evidence collected from the house in Kurim. The camera used to watch over Andre was of high quality and could only be obtained at a great cost from outside the Czech Republic. Additionally, Clara and Katerina rented 3 homes and maintained an extravagant lifestyle despite low-paying jobs. This led to suspicion that torture was for the purpose of selling the images of the abuse to sadomasochistic paedophiles. Now, the footage found on a videotape of Andre tied up in the closet for hours on end supported this theory. It was believed that the boys were subjected to torture by paying customers who satisfied their perverted desires. Now, Barbara's pantomime as Anna was also thought to be a way of repackage a product for sick-minded individuals to enjoy better. The big question was whether Barbara was a willing participant or forced into this arrangement. Now, the third hypothesis suggests a more mysterious explanation that the abuse and other surrounding aspects were closely tied to the splinter sect's fundamental beliefs. Now, this theory resembles what we would commonly refer to as cult activity, clandestine acts committed to achieving a prophetic goal. Now, Barbara's transformation played a significant role in this theory. The Grail Movement's messianic origins were well known, and Jan Dvorsky's Emmanuelating movement had previously created or inspired offshoot revivals. Therefore, it's conceivable that Barbara's transformation was initiated with the aim of creating a new messiah to lead the faithful where the others had failed. Alternatively, she may have just been intended to be an icon or figurehead for the faithful to rally around. According to this hypothesis, so Jacob and Andre's attitudes towards the person they knew as Anna could provide a clue to the possible motivation for the abuse. Now, investigators noticed how attached they were to her, but initially believed it was a familial bond that had developed since she had become part of their lives. Before the abuse, they were naturally friendly and sociable children, and it seemed reasonable they would welcomed her into their lives. However, the more they talked about her, the more intense their adoration seemed, and the more glowing their praise of her became. A caregiver at the institution recalled Jacob saying that Anna was special, chosen by God. When questioned further, Jacob refused to elaborate. It seemed that the adults in the boys' lives had shaped their attitude towards Anna through a religious lens. This perspective has also influenced their other relationships, leading to an increase in aloofness. Even their close sibling bond had deteriorated to the point of hostility after their abuse. Their father's absence and the loss of contact with their extended family further isolated the boys. Andre had no chance to make friends during captivity, while Jacob was discouraged from interacting with his classmates. As a result, team sports, social outings and other activities were discontinued, leaving them with no opportunities to socialise with children their own age. Clara herself was not immune to isolation, as she had been separated from the boys in the months following their visit to the cottage. Jacob was under the care of his aunt Katerina, while Andre was held captive at the daycare centre under the harsh supervision of Hanna Pesova. The only person with whom the boys had a positive relationship was Barbara, who they knew as Anna. The physical abuse they often endured revolved around Anna and the boys being woken up in the middle of the night and told they would have to receive a lash across the back to spare her from 2. They complied almost without fail.
Ooh, okay.
So the calculated details of the boys' relationship suggested a purpose behind this sudden onset of abuse. If it is possible that Barbara was meant to be an icon, then the boys were intended to be her protectors, and the abuse means reinforcing their loyalty to her while eliminating any other loyalty. The boys' behaviour after their ordeal hinted at a goal of creating a pair of unthinking, unfeeling, and completely loyal guardians who could support whatever Barbara was meant to be.
This is kind of like... So, not sure if you know about this, but you know, like back in the day, royal family, you've heard the term whipping boy.
Yeah.
So you'd have like a child who would be educated alongside like a royal, like a prince or something like that. And if the prince acted up, they wouldn't get smacked.
Yeah.
But the whipping boy, who, bear in mind, they would be getting all the educational benefits of, and also being close to royalty at that time, but they'd get the shit beaten out of them for stuff that the other kid were doing.
So could they just literally be little shits?
So the princes could be like little shits. I mean, I think the idea was also, and it's sort of questionable how far this worked, was that there would be a bond between the little prince or lord and their whipping boy. Yeah. So they wouldn't act up as much because they see what was happening to the whipping boy and be like, oh shit, every time I act up, they're getting battered and we're mates. So maybe I shouldn't act up and maybe I should be good. But obviously, that's in theory. In practice,
they didn't give a shit.
Didn't really give a shit, maybe. But it's a similar sort of precedent, isn't it? Like, she's the chosen one and she gets spared while these poor two lads are getting all the fucking abuse.
Yeah. I mean, well, the practice of breaking down someone's individual will to the point where they accept authority without personal motivation, it's been in use for centuries. The child pornography and cult theories quickly emerged in the people's minds, with everything indicating a clear objective behind the entire incident. Now, it's evident that Katerina and her accomplices' simple, undirected frustration or random hysteria could not justify the situation. While the police tended to be more grounded in temporal affairs, they leaned towards the child pornography theory but did not rule out the possibility of a religious explanation. Now, despite the authorities' continued search for clues in the case during the final third of 2007, they remained unsuccessful. The suspects in custody staying tight-lipped, with occasional statements denying any wrongdoing or expressing regret without disclosing the crime's details in Clara's case. Now, investigators knew they would not be able to extract any information from the suspects until the trial without new leads. However, a significant loose end remain untied. Barbora Skrlová had vanished and not been seen or heard of since August. Her role in the crime was uncertain, and her testimony was crucial to comprehending the whole truth of this case. Now, authorities postponed the trial until they could locate Barbara, who they knew had passed through Germany on her way to Denmark, and there was a possibility she had been in Sweden recently. The investigators focused their foreign inquiries on these three countries. Their patience eventually paid off when Barbara finally resurfaced in an unexpected place shortly after the turn of the year. However, the way that she evaded detection was an even more audacious and outstanding than her previous masquerade as Anna. Now, Tromsø, which is located at a latitude of approximately 69 degrees north, 190 miles above the Arctic Circle, which marks the boundary of the Arctic region at approximately 66 degrees north. It's widely acknowledged as the northernmost city on Earth. It is situated in a region known for the phenomenon of the midnight sun and midday darkness. During the period between mid-May and late June, the sun never sets in Tromsø, while between late November and mid-January, it never rises. On January the 5th, 2008, during the depths of winter's long night, Michael Reha walked into a car rental office in Oslo to return a vehicle he had hired several weeks prior.
So this is in Norway?
Yeah. So he processed the paperwork, police burst in with guns, ordering him to lie on the floor and handcuffing him. Reha's travelling companion with 13-year-old boy named Adam was the reason for the arrest. Adam had apparently been abducted from an orphanage in Oslo several weeks earlier.
Okay.
Now, Adam was said to be the son of Czech playwright Martin Farner, who had immigrated to Norway from the Czech Republic with his family and worked for an avant-garde theatre company in Oslo. While Farner's wife and other children returned to the Czech Republic in September, Adam began attending his school in Oslo. Although Adam seemed like a typical 13-year-old boy with disaffected expression common to adolescence and a fondness for skateboarding, his teachers observed a few peculiarities about him. They noticed he appeared older than his years, with some estimating him to be at least 16. Additionally, he was thin, had a shaved head and permanent dark circles around his eyes, which prompted them to wonder if he was ever suffering from cancer or another severe illness. Despite enrolling in a year-long intensive Norwegian language class, Adam demonstrated a good grasp of the language and interacted well with his teachers and classmates. The teachers also observed indications of mental distress in Adam's behaviour, which could be due to past trauma. He appeared anxious most of the time and was fearful of loud noises. Once a teacher entered the classroom and slammed the door shut, causing Adam to experience a hysterical breakdown. The possible source of the trauma was revealed in the extremely disturbing stories he told. Stories of being abused by his father and rented out to older men for sexual purposes. His stories were very specific, describing in detail the acts that were performed on him. Teachers were understandably concerned and had to determine the truth of allegations. They brought in a psychologist to assess and counsel him. Adam was removed from his father's custody, and his father was to be arrested if he ever committed any of the described acts. The psychologist spent some time coaxing information out of Adam before calling the authorities. The final straw was a drawing Adam made of 7 children with blood on their hands and feet and a man verbally threatening them while standing over them. Adam himself was child number 7, and he claimed that he and 6 other children had been tortured and abused together. In early December, Farner was arrested on suspicion of child abuse and Adam was placed in an orphanage. On the 16th, a few days after being separated from his father, the orphanage took children on an outing. During the outing, Adam suddenly ran off and got into a nearby idling car which sped off. Despite appearing to be voluntary, Adam's escape immediately raised suspicions that he had been abducted by child traffickers, likely accomplices of the ring that Fawn had been renting him out to. A nationwide manhunt was launched and Adam's image was broadcast on TV and in newspapers across the country, accompanied by pleas for anyone with information to contact the police. On the 19th of the month, Adam was spotted in Bergen, which is located just under 300 miles west of Oslo, accompanied by a man believed to be Michael Reher. Adam was holding a man's hand as if he was his father. The pair entered the Neptune Hotel in Bergen and asked to use the phone. The receptionist who assisted them, Natalie Stormark, was unaware of the missing Adam and she didn't read newspapers or watch the news. However, she found their request strange since they had a mobile phone with them. There was no need for them to use the hotel telephone.
Right.
Based on their accents, Stormark assumed the man and boy were Russian and suspected they may have been attempting to scam the hotel. She noticed several valuable paintings in the lobby and believed that they were potential targets for theft. After the man and boy left without incident, Stormark reported the descriptions to the police just in case they were involved in any suspicious activities.
Why the sudden distrust for Russians? They're Russians, so they're up to shit.
I mean, they just looked dodgy, didn't they?
That's racial profiling, that is.
It is. Now, the hotel received a follow-up call the next day, with the caller asking detailed questions about the man and boy's appearance. When asked about the boy's demeanour, Stormark reported that he seemed relatively calm and that the man and boy had seemed like father and son. Stormark found it unusual that they were holding hands, stating that here in Norway, 13-year-old boys don't normally do that.
They're a stoic lot, aren't they? in Norway.
I know, yeah.
Bless them. That's not me racially profiling the Norwegians either. It's just generally speaking that they seem to be quite stoic.
Now, when Farmer and his family arrived in Norway, they travelled with Michael Reher and his sister. However, when police attempted to locate them, they discovered that Reher had taken several weeks off work from his job as a computer store in Oslo and had rented a car on the same day as Adam's disappearance. Based on this information, the police concluded that Reher was most likely responsible for abducting Adam. Finding Reher's car on the road would have been challenging given the unknown motives and destination. However, it was believed that he would return the car to a rental company branch eventually. The company employees were alerted to watch out for Reher, which ultimately paid off when he and Adam walked into the branch in Tromsø, 1,020 miles away from the starting point in Oslo. They had been on the road for 20 days. The car rental company employees immediately contacted police and Reher was taken into custody. It was a relief that Adam was finally rescued, but the police were shocked to discover that he was not a 13-year-old boy, but rather a 33-year-old woman named Barbora Skrlová.
What the fuck? What the fuck? What the What the fuck?
Those who had spent time with Adam were devastated upon learning the truth about Skrlova's identity. They had not only spent months with her, but also empathised and supposed horrors she had endured. Learning that it had all been a deception, potentially to conceal actual child abuse, was distressing enough for some to require counselling.
What
So
go back, like rewind.
So the 13-year-old boy Adam.
Yeah, I got that. The 13-year-old boy Adam is Barbora Skrlová, who was Anna, and so her like fucking minders needed therapy.
No, her friends.
Her friends,
like people who looked after her,
who looked after her,
and like the teachers and stuff, because they were like,
oh, it's understandably why, but like Jesus fucking Christ!
Told you the story was weird,
mate. This is fantastic in the awful way.
So, during a press interview with a Czech outlet, Ingrid Eriksson, the headmistress of the school attended by Adam in Oslo, struggled to come to terms with the truth about the boy she had known. "Let's continue to call him Adam," she said when asked about Barbora. "For me, he will always be Adam." Helena Farmer, Adam's mother, had enrolled Barbora at the school using Adam's identity. When asked if she had seen any documentation proving Adam's identity, Eriksson recalled that she had been informed that he did not possess a passport. Instead, Helena had presented her own passport in which Adam was listed as a dependent. Now, it's important now to note that the Farners had a biological son named Adam who returned to the Czech Republic with the rest of the family while Barbora continued to impersonate him. Helena requested that Adam be excused from gym class, which allowed Barbora to avoid changing clothes in front of others while at school. Barbora's alternative account added another layer of complexity to the case, making a trial necessary to sort through the details. With Barbora present and seemingly willing to cooperate, the trial could finally proceed, and on April 2nd, 2008, more than 11 months after the investigation had started, the police officially closed their investigation. The case file contained a staggering 6,000 pages of documents, including witness statements, collected evidence, and expert analysis. On April 21st, the accused were formally charged. The Morova sisters, Hanna Basova and Jan Skrla, faced potential sentences of up to 12 years for their involvement in the deprivation of liberty of minors and the abuse of persons under their care. Meanwhile, Barbora Skrlová and Jan Turek could face up to 8 years for aggravated cruelty. So yeah, maximum 12 years.
Is this one in Norway?
No, this is in the Czech Republic.
Oh, this is in the Czech Republic, okay.
So the Regional Prosecutor's Office in Brno issued a statement alongside the indictments which detailed the abuse suffered by Jacob and Andre. The abuse included beatings, physical and psychological torture, humiliation and extended periods of confinement in dark rooms. The statement also noticed that the abuse appeared to have been intended to sever the child's familial bonds and create individuals devoid of willpower, desensitized to violence and pain. Katerina and Barbora were accused of damaging the reputation of the Brno Children's Institution, which had been received considerable media attention following Anna's escape and had been publicly criticised for it. The institution had been vandalised with the words "Causa Kurim" spray painted on one of its buildings. However, in a short period before the main trial, both Barbora and Katerina were acquitted of this charge. The court's decision to acquit Barbora and Katerina of the charge of malicious damage to the reputation of Brno Children's Institution was based on the fact that the deception had started long before Barbora as Anna had come into contact with the institution. Moreover, the deception had not been aimed at bringing the institution into disrepute. The institution was also partly responsible for the situation, as it should have conducted an immediate medical examination of Anna when she arrived in their care. This would have uncovered the deception without harming the institution's reputation and prevented the costly and delayed search for Barbora. The court deemed the media attention is not detrimental, as any organisation that attracts media attention would have to live with it. Now, during the trial, the court addressed several issues raised by the defendants. Clara's lawyer Daniel Savic requested that the proceedings be held in camera, which meant that all hearings would take place in private without any access to the public or press. Savic argued that the involvement of minors in the case made it highly sensitive, but the endless media coverage would not serve the best interests of the boys, who had already faced a great deal of attention. The other defence attorneys and the prosecution supported this request. If approved, the details of the trial would not be available to the public in real time, but would be released in heavily edited monthly updates by the court. During the Kurim case trial, Katerina's lawyer, Pavel Holub, objected to one of the experts who was scheduled to testify. He claimed that Marta Skrlová, a psychiatrist who assessed Jacob and Andrei shortly after the liberation, was biased because he had made a financial contribution to the Brno Children's Institution. Holub argued that Skrlová's assessments of the boy's condition could not be considered impartial due to her donation. However, the objection failed to uphold in court, and Skrlová made a donation of 5,000 koruna in December 2007, long after she assessed the boys and made her report. She had made the contribution as part of her usual Christmas donations, and she had done so simply because she had become familiar with the institution through her work with the boys. Now, the court announced the preliminary findings of the psychiatric assessment of Barbora Skrlová, which could determine her fitness to stand trial. If she was found to be a victim of extreme mental torture and unfit for trial due to diminished responsibility, it could impact her sentencing. However, the assessment found her mentally fit and healthy enough to be held responsible for her actions, and that she had acted on her own accord. Though the finer details of the assessment were not disclosed, a statement was released indicating that Barbara had deliberately manipulated Clara and that she had personality disorder and did not preclude her from prosecution. The Kurim case began on June 17, 2008, amidst yet another media frenzy, with over 3 dozen journalists, including some from Norwegian media outlets, in attendance. Though both the prosecution and defence requested a closed trial, Judge Pavel Goth denied the request, stating that the case did not meet the necessary criteria of sensitivity. However, the public would be excluded in certain exceptional cases, such as the viewing of the recordings of Andrei. Renata Skrlová, mother of Barbara and Jan Skrla, burst out in front of the press box, claiming that the indictment was a result of police ignorance and that her daughter was innocent. Clara was the first person to testify in the trial. Now, it was clear from the moment she entered the courtroom for the first hearing that she was barely holding herself together. She shuffled in dejectedly, with her head bowed and her eyes red from crying. As the charges were read, she began to weep, and she continued to do so through her testimony. Her voice barely rose above a mournful whisper as she confirmed the validity of her charges laid against her. She called her part in the abuse of her own children a terrible thing, but explained that she had done it with the purest of intentions. Clara testified that everything started in the summer of 2003 when Katerina asked about her interest in social childcare and why she wanted to study it. Clara explained that she wanted to help abused and orphaned children. At the time, Clara thought nothing of it, but looking back, she believes this is when Katerina began to manipulate her. In the autumn of that year, Katerina invited Clara to her apartment and showed her a child's bed with toys. She confided in Clara that she had taken in a child from Norway at the request of a secret organisation. The girl had been rescued from human traffickers and had suffered severe sexual abuse and was also dying of leukemia. Katerina begged Clara to keep the matter confidential and asked if she could perform a bone marrow compatibility test with the girl who needed a transplant. After agreeing to confidentiality, Clara met the child, whom Katerina introduced as Hypotheses. Now, she was emaciated and had unusual mannerisms, speaking haltingly in a low voice and avoiding eye contact. Clara did not make the connection between the child before her and Barbora Skrlová, whom Katerina had claimed had passed away. The difference in appearance and behaviour was so drastic that the possibility of impersonation didn't even cross Clara's mind. As they spent time together, Katerina commented on how Anna, as the girls was known, seemed drawn towards Clara and was more open with her than others. Anna even confided in Clara that her real name was Anna. Katerina asked Clara if she could take Anna into her home to provide stability and love she needed. Clara hesitated but was persuaded by a doctor who was supposedly affiliated with the organisation that had brought Anna into Katerina's care. The doctor advised Clara over the phone and encouraged her to help Anna live out her remaining days in comfort and security. It later emerged that the doctor was likely a fabrication, as all communication was through text messages and occasional phone calls traced to Katerina's phone. Despite this, Clara trusted Katerina completely and believed that helping Anna was her God-given duty. In December 2005, Anna moved in with the family, and initially her relationship with Jacob and Andrei was normal and healthy. However, during a trip to a cottage in the woods, Anna's manipulative behaviour began to emerge. So caring for Anna proved to be more challenging than Clara had anticipated, with Anna's health issues requiring constant attention and treatment. Anna had seizures that required restraint and had hydrocephaly, which necessitated daily spinal massages for up to 8 hours each night. During these massages, Clara was encouraged to comfort Anna by stroking her genital area to bond as mother and daughter.
Wait, what?
Anna was also emotionally demanding and frequently threw explosive tantrums when she did not get her way, sometimes behaving dangerously. Now, balancing her studies with her new home life was a monumental task for Clara, and she often slept for just 3 hours a day. The stress took a toll on her, and Jacob and Andre started acting out, possibly in an attempt to regain the maternal attention they had lost to Anna. The stress may have also contributed to Clara's exaggerated perception of the boys' behavioural problems. Moreover, in the fact that Katerina and a secret organisation were whispering in Clara's ear, convincing her that the boys' issues were far worse than they actually were. The mysterious doctor had been waiting in the wings ready to offer Clara a solution to the boys' behavioural problems. According to the doctor, the boys needed a serious attitude adjustment, or else their bad behaviour will continue into adulthood, ultimately leading them to a life of crime and imprisonment. The doctor suggested that a taste of prison life might give the boys a glimpse into their future and set them on the right path. To implement this plan, a weekend at the cottage in the Viverska Bitska was organised. Clara claimed that she had no part in planning the weekend and that it was supposedly organised by Katerina, who followed the doctor's instructions. However, Hanna Basova, Jan Turek and Jan Skrlová were also involved in the planning, with Turek providing dog cages for the boys to sleep in. At the cottage, Clara followed Katerina's instructions to participate in the abuse of her own children. She claimed that her sole intention was to correct their behaviour, but she was not allowed to comfort them when they lay whimpering in their cages after the first harsh treatment. Clara stated she had no knowledge whatsoever of the dissemination of torture pornography involving her children and did not speculate on the reasons for the abuse. She denied any involvement in the activities of the Skrlová sect and stated her only exposure to the Grail Movement's teachings was through a book given to her by Katerina, which she said she had no interest in, and she never attended any ceremonies.
I love that.
It's just like when the Jehovah's Witnesses...
It is, isn't it? It's like, thanks, that's nice. Free book. I'm not going to read it, but cheers. On your way. So the vicar will be round in a bit. Yeah.
So she claimed her only religious motivation was to help Anna and raise her children well. During the trial, the issue of Anna's adoption was brought to light. Clara testified about the substitution of Victor Scala's daughter Maria for court hearings and DNA tests required in the adoption process. She was told that the deception was necessary to prevent Anna's supposed abusers from finding her. Victor Scala and his wife Susanna denied knowing that their daughter was used to commit perjury in their testimonies. Susanna had worked at the Pripriska daycare centre with Katerina, Barbora and Hanna Basova. She admitted to being a member of Skrlov's breakaway set from the Grail Movement, but claimed that neither she nor her husband held privileged positions within the structure and were not involved in any secret activities. Maria was a child at the time and told that it was all a game. Katerina and Basova worked on Maria to make her a believable substitute for Anna. Maria's hair was dyed darker and she wore brown contact lenses to cover her blue eyes. She was instructed to observe Anna's mannerisms and reproduce them as closely as possible to create the illusion that she was autistic.
What the fuck?
At the supposed instruction of the doctor, Katerina concocted the story of Anna having previously been in the custody of their grandmother. Clara and Katerina approached their mother Anicka and told her of Anna's story and why they needed to deceive the authorities. Out of sympathy, Anicka agreed to perjure herself to help her daughters give an unfortunate child a safe home. Clara was the only defendant to fully admit guilt. Jan Turek was the first to offer a detailed rebuttal, maintaining that he had neither known about nor directly participated in the abuse of Jacob or Andre. The allegation against him had destroyed his reputation and business at his clothing salon. According to Turek, his only connection to the case was providing dog cages. Katerina, who knew about his work with canines, had approached him asking for his help in borrowing a couple of cages. The cages were not even his, but borrowed from the Brno police, with whom he'd been working.
Really?
I know, yeah.
Oh my god. Talk about shitting where you eat.
Turek claimed that he had known what the cages would be used for. He would never have helped Katerina obtain them. Turek also denied involvement with the Grail Movement or the Splinter Sect, although he had been on friendly terms with Joseph Scaler during his time with the Scout Troop. He had never been drawn into the esoteric beliefs. Additionally, he stated he had barely known Barbara, and he had never been close enough to Katerina to know Anna, let alone that Barbara was disguised as Anna. Turek had faced accusations of physical, verbal and emotional abuse during his previous marriage, as his ex-wife Lucia had called the police multiple times and sought refuge in a shelter for battered women. However, during the trial, Lucia testified that Turek had been a devoted husband and father, a great teacher, and had never responded to her physical attacks. She claimed that she hurt herself to make allegations more believable. Turek's current girlfriend, Marketa Skrlová, had also testified that he had never shown any aggression towards her or her twin sons from a previous marriage. Despite this, Marcela Zednikova, a former friend of Clara's who had been friends with Lucia, was surprised by Lucia's change in story and speculated that Lucia had been warned not to talk about the divorce or her treatment by the secret agencies after Turek was named as a suspect in Jacob and Andrei's abuse. Turek's reputation had also affected Skrlová, as her ex-husband had obtained an injunction to protect their children from Turek. As a result, Skrlová was only allowed limited time with her children, and they were confused about why they could no longer live with her. Now, the role played by Barbora Skrlová in the abuse was the most controversial aspect of this case. When it was discovered that Anna, the victim, had never existed and was a persona created by Barbara, people were left wondering whether she was a willing participant or a victim herself. Clara, who had believed that Anna was a real person, could not speculate on this question. However, it was clear that Anna had never been subjected to the same level of abuse as the boys and had even assisted in administering it, such as the instance of holding Andrei's head underwater. Jacob's testimony, which was read to the court, stated that Anna had shown no reluctance to carry out the abuse. Barbara's testimony, however, painted a different picture. She claimed that she had been forced into the role of Anna and that Katerina had threatened to drown her if she did not do it to Andrei. According to her, the transformation had begun 4 or 5 years before her adoption by Clara, during which time her contact with the outside world had gradually been reduced until the only people in her life were Katerina and Basova. Now, Barbara said that the physical transformation had been extremely grueling and she was only allowed 1 yogurt per day and almost no other food.
Jeez.
Barbara also claimed that she had been subjected to physical and sexual abuse by unknown individuals from the beginning. The worst of it was by Hansen, who had raped her and caused her bleeding and agony while laughing and cursing at her. Barbara's lawyer, Richard Novak, argued that the reason they had been targeted was her vulnerability. He stated that she had always been physically and psychologically fragile, as evidenced by a enlarged thyroid since childhood that had stunted her cognitive development. Medical documents confirming the diagnosis of epilepsy were also disclosed to the court. As a result, Barbara had never been able to perform most basic adult duties on her own and had always had to rely on other people. Since their time together in university, that person had always been Katerina. Barbara initially claimed that to have scars on her body as evidence of abuse, stating that cuts and welts were inflicted by her torturers. However, upon closer inspection, marks told a different story. The welts, which she claimed were from cigarettes being stubbed out on her body, were actually ordinary abrasions. Medical examiners noticed that they seemed to shift position slightly when inspected a few days later. They were the same size as the back end of a pen, which soon determined that they had been self-inflicted. Furthermore, the cuts on the body were much older than she had claimed, were actually the result of cosmetic surgery that Barbara had undergone while in university.
What?
2 symmetrical scars on her breast were from breast reduction, while the several other marks on her abdomen were from liposuction. Additionally, medical examination revealed that Barbara's allegations of rape were false. There was no sign of physical trauma and her hymen was found to be intact.
She was a virgin.
Don't get too excited. During the incarceration, she's a virgin. We can take her blood.
It's Shark Week.
During the incarceration, all of the defendants underwent psychiatric evaluations conducted by Blanka Zapalatova, a psychologist, Milhus Hambulova, a psychiatrist, and Ruzena Hajnova, a sexologist.
Sexologist.
I want to be where are you? I'm a sexologist.
Sexologist.
Sounds sexy.
Oh, fuck. Lost it now. That's the one. I was talking to somebody the other day in work.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
If you know, you know. So, like, they were telling me about, like, interesting pursuits that they followed. And that they said they'd had to do, like, a rope sort of climbing course for their work. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, what sort of... Like, just talking about interesting sounding jobs here. And I'm like, okay then, so, like, what sort of work do you do for that? They're like, I'm a vision technician. I'm like, a vision technician? What's that? And they're like, there's massive pause, and I'm like, come on, this sounds like interesting as fuck. Like a vision tech. It's a posh name for a window cleaner.
Oh.
Legitimately. How hilarious is that?
I was speaking to someone.
A vision technician.
I asked them what the job was, and they said, what was it? They were a hygiene and decontamination specialist. They were a cleaner.
Fucking brilliant, isn't it? What would you class like this as if it was a job?
This?
Just, I mean...
Chatting shit.
Content creator?
Yeah.
That's all, like...
Influencer.
We are on Instagram, people.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Just a brief aside from this very dark...
Although Katerina Janskela and Hanna Basova initially refused to cooperate during their sessions, the analysts were able to extract the necessary information. Their experts' findings were then presented to the court on the 10th day of hearings. Clara was diagnosed with historic personality disorder, which characterised by a strong desire for external recognition and admiration, as well as dependent personality disorder, which made her unable to make decisions without the approval of an authority figure. Katerina, who was intelligent, creative and ambitious, had a natural authority that Clara craved. However, Katerina also had self-centred and socially distant tendencies, lacked empathy and was able to emotionally manipulate Clara for her own purposes. Clara was born a victim and a perpetrator in this sense, fixated on the approval she received from Katerina, the fictitious doctor, and Anna to the detriment of her own children. Blanca Zapalota... Blanca from fucking Street
Fighter, fucking...
Blanca Zapaleta.
It's got Zap.
I know, yeah. Suggested that Clara's behaviour may have followed a similar pattern, even though if she had known about the deception, it testified truthfully. It was speculated that Katerina had sadistic and paedophilic tendencies, which she had exhibited in her treatment of her nephews and manipulation of Clara's childlike nature. Katerina had also participated in sexualised bonding treatment prescribed by the fictitious doctor for Anna. Additionally, former members of Katerina's Woodcraft Club testified that spending hours alone in a tent with Barbara, suggesting a possible pre-existing sexual relationship between the two.
What sort of fucking woodcrafting are we talking about?
I don't know.
Surely you can do that at a village hall. No, you don't have to be in a fucking tent.
They're in the Czech Republic, man. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah, barbarians.
Sorry, Adela. Jan Turek was diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, categorised by a desire for external recognition and admiration, as well as a tendency to make excessive emotional displays. He also exhibited signs of impulsivity and aggression. Janskela and Hanna Bazova were uncooperative during their psychiatric evaluations, but their behaviour revealed different underlying causes. Skela's intelligence was below average and his evasiveness was blunt and reflected his simplicity. Basova, on the other hand, was one of the above-average intelligence and was more creative. She had a tendency towards a distorted view of reality and was better to able to justify that view through a use of her faculties. Additionally, Skela played a strong attachment to and admiration for his father, which manifested in a tendency towards automatic obedience. Now, Barbara was diagnosed with severe histrionic personality disorder, exhibiting overt deceitfulness and a desire to manipulate others. Her infantile and vulnerable act was just that, an act. She could act aggressively in an adult manner when challenged. Her disorder explained how she was able to convincingly pass herself off as Anna and Adam, but her decision to take on these characters was deliberate each time.
That is fucked up.
She did not show any signs of post-traumatic stress disorder or withdrawal symptoms from the drug regime she claimed to have been forced to take. As part of her defence, her lawyer Richard Novak procured the aid of psychiatric experts of his own, Ivan Weinberger and Jana Talkova, who presented findings that differ from her prosecution's experts. They stated that Barbara did suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, especially fearing court appearances because she would have to be handcuffs, which reminded her of her past traumatic experiences. The report also disputed the prosecution's claim that Barbara was manipulative, arguing that she was naturally submissive and tended to defer to the authority figures. Katerina had taken advantage of this trait since Barbara's university days, and the report argued that she had been exploited and degraded by the reprehensible mind experiment inflicted on her. The trauma had left her with a permanent damage to her sense of self, yet she still displays some attachment to her abusers, a sign of Stockholm Syndrome. Now, the report highlighted Barbara's pre-existing health conditions, including epilepsy, thyroid and liver problems, which made her dependent on others throughout her life. Imprisonment was deemed inappropriate and cruel, and the best outcome was for her to receive protective institutional treatment to help her recover and potentially reintegrate into society. The stark difference between the prosecution and defence's experts' findings caused an uproar in court, with Judge Pavel Goth questioning the defence's motives and sternly warning them about perjury. However, Weinberger and Talkova stood by their report, explaining that Barbara's transformation into Adam had been driven by a fear of the people who had harmed her and her belief that becoming Adam was the only way to evade them. As the two sides' experts argued over incompetence and motives, the trial was adjourned for 2.5 months to allow new independent experts to evaluate Barbara and provide a definitive report. When the trial resumed on October the 16th, 2008, Martin and Helena Farner testified, shedding light on an unresolved mystery of how they encountered Barbara and what happened until her capture in Norway. During his testimony, Farner revealed that he had known Barbara for approximately 10 years since his time at the Movenci, but he had not seen her frequently in recent years. In May of the previous year, Barbara had arrived at Farner's family home in Sundberg, accompanied by two men, one of whom was Jan Tissar, another former member of the Movenci. Farner stated that Barbara appeared extremely fearful and was in poor physical condition, often fainting from the apparent strain she was under. Helena described the situation in military terms, likening it to a wartime scenario where they had to decide whether to hide a partisan who had knocked on their door. They eventually decided to take Barbara in, believing they were aiding someone in need. Barbara lived with them for a while before leaving for Sweden with Helena and the rest of the family, while Farmer stayed behind. Farner followed 14 days later and met with Josef Skrlová in Sweden, who told him that they had helped Barbara to wait for the media scrum in the Czech Republic to calm down before she could return without facing immediate backlash. Farner was not involved in Barbara's first attempt at repatriation, but when it became apparent that her return would not be welcomed by the Czech legal system, she was returned to their care. The Farners planned to move to Norway, and Barbara had to come with them. She needed to blend in, so she came up with the idea of pretending to be Adam to evade any pursuers. Initially, the Farners tried to dissuade Barbara from the idea, citing the risk of discovery and the danger to their family. However, Barbara's psychological health seemed to worsen the more they resisted her. Eventually, they gave in and she took on the role of Adam with enthusiasm. She insisted that the entire family call her Adam all the time. The transformation took place before they moved to Norway, and they crossed the border with Barbara as Adam without any issues. However, in Norway, Barbara became restless and wanted to attend school as Adam to have a social outlet. The foreigners tried to talk her out of it, but she insisted, and eventually they agreed. As Barbara became more demanding, Helena became concerned about her own sanity and feared becoming like Clara, who had become absorbed by Barbara and started abusing her own children. Helena decided to take her children and return to the Czech Republic, leaving Farner to manage Barbara as best he could. However, Barbara's fabricated stories led to Farner's arrest and exposed the entire deception. The Farners not only paid an emotional, psychological and reputational toll due to Barbara's intrusion into their lives, but also a significant financial cost. While in Norway, they only needed one 200 kroner card for their mobile phones for a whole month. But Barbara used one every week or so, resulting in the expense of 150,000 Czech koruna, which is equivalent to about £5,000 in today's money.
In dollars, which is be like what, about
$7,500?
$7,500.
During the trial, Katerina's testimony took centre stage. Previously, she'd only given brief statements denying the validity of Barbara and Clara's testimonies, occasionally interjecting questions to other witnesses and refusing to incriminate herself or her loved ones when pressed on further information. However, Katerina had prepared a statement that she wished to read before the court. She explained that she had remained silent until then due to a difficult situation she was in. Katerina had always loved Clara like a sister, and Barbara, whom she had cared for like a child for a decade, had been at odds with each other. But that when the accusation that Barbara had deliberately manipulated Clara became almost a foregone conclusion, Katerina felt compelled to speak up. Katerina shared that she'd first met Barbara in 1996 and had witnessed her struggles in navigating everyday life. Common occurrences include locking herself out of her apartment, forgetting that she had a bath running until it overflowed and flooded the entire bathroom, and taking 3 hours to vacuum a single room. Katerina attributed these problems to Barbara's inability to appraise situations realistically, as her perception of reality was different from most other people's. She had trouble with both understanding and being understood by others. According to Katerina, Barbara had always needed another person to ground her. Her relationship with her alcoholic and often neglectful mother could not provide that for her. As a result, Barbara had always turned to friends, even going so far as to emulate their style of dress. Katerina had done her best to take care of Barbara and provide her with the grounding that she needed. In 2003, she sought out a specialist to provide therapy for Barbara, which Katerina believed was the source of the stories of brainwashing and abuse. Due to Barbara's skewed perception of reality, she unintentionally exaggerated things that happened to her over 6 times. Now, medication prescribed to her became constant drugging in her mind, and behavioural exercises seemed like torture. In early 2005, Barbara met with Clara at Katerina's apartment. According to Katerina, Clara did not recognise Barbara, who unintentionally projected a younger image. Katerina saw an opportunity to care for Barbara by pretending to be a child, and Clara helped take care of her. During Katerina's statement, Clara broke down in tears and screamed at her sister, accusing her of taking away her children and lying. After speaking with her attorney, Clara left the courtroom. Katerina resumed her statement, claiming that in the summer of 2006, she and Clara developed a program to re-educate Jacob and Andre, who were becoming unruly. She denied any religious connection and claimed that Barbara had no role in re-education, except for drowning of Andre, which Barbara testified was coerced into doing. Katerina refused to answer any further questions. A team of 8 specialists from the Motol University Hospital in Prague analysed Barbara and presented their findings on the second to last day of the trial. Unfortunately for Barbara, the report confirmed that the prosecution's case, finding no evidence of serious mental illness and diagnosing her with histrionic personality disorder and dissociative disorder. The report noticed that cramps resembling epileptic seizures were an extreme symptom of dissociative disorder. The report concluded that Barbara deliberately assumed different roles and was positioning herself as a victim of manipulation intentionally, with her pretense of naivety being deliberate. After the presentation of the psychiatrist's report's findings, the case was ready to be concluded. While some of the defence attorneys attempted to request further witnesses to be subpoenaed, Goff declined, stating that there was no further testimony or evidence was necessary to decide the case. All that remained was for the prosecution and the defence to present their closing arguments and for the defendants to exercise their right to have their final say. Prosecutor Zuzana Zamarakova argued that the evidence and the testimony presented should leave no doubt at all that the accused participated in the torture of Jacob and Andre. She specifically addressed the roles of the 3 main players in the case. While acknowledging that Clara may have been manipulated, Zamarakova argued that it was not an excuse for failing in her duty as a mother. However, she was slightly lenient on it, as her testimony had helped bring the other defendants to justice. Regarding Katerina, she dismissed her claims of being a victim of manipulation by a mysterious doctor, pointing out that all communications supposedly received from the doctor had been traced back to the phone numbers and email addresses belonging to her. She argued that Katerina was too confident and authoritative to have been manipulated. As for Barbara, she argued that every action had been deliberate and self-motivated. She had played every role, including that of Adam, while retaining agency and personal identity. Due to the extreme severity and systematic nature of what had been done to Jacob and Andre, Zaramakova proposed that Morovid sisters and Barbara receive maximum sentences possible. 10 years each for the sisters and 7 for Barbara. For the 3 other suspects, she recommended moderate sentences but left the precise decision up to the judge. Zaremakova also recommended that the defendants pay damages to Jacob and Andre, 240,000 krona for her elder brother and 320,000 for her younger brother, which is worth about £6,000 to £8,000 respectively at the time.
It's probably a bit more now. Like, what was this, 2007?
Yeah, 2008.
2008, yeah. God, that's gone up now.
Daniel Sevic, Clara's attorney, argued for leniency for his client, emphasising that she had been expressed sincere regret for her actions and had cooperated in revealing the full extent of the crimes. He also noted that the prosecution's psychiatric experts had called her both perpetrator and victim. Sevic pointed the finger at Katerina and Barbara as the main culprits who had been deliberately deceiving Clara and convinced her that the children were out of control. Without them, she would never have committed the crime. Sevic argued for leniency for Clara, stating that while she participated in the abuse, she did not commit the worst acts and show reluctance. He also highlighted her remorse and cooperation with authorities. He blamed Katerina and Barbara for manipulating Clara and convincing her that her children needed discipline. Milan Stanek and Zdeněk Jaros argued that the testimony against their clients was unreliable, with Jaros pointing out that the client had only mentioned once and Stanek questioning the identification of Turek. Hlavic argued that his client Besovin played a minor role and requested a wholly suspended sentence. Katerina's lawyer, Pavel Holob, defended Barbara instead of focusing on his client's defence, stating that Barbara was seeking motherly love and a safe environment to be herself. He admitted that Katerina manipulated Clara to provide this environment. Skrlova's lawyer, Richard Novak, expressed frustration with the trial's focus on Barbara's guilt and argued that her abuse was a separate case that had not received enough attention. He criticised the sudden change in the epilepsy diagnosis and asked the public to consider Barbara's motives for her action. After the attorneys made their arguments, the defendants had an opportunity to make final statements. Katerina denied being the previous originator of the messages from the doctor and claimed that her previous statements had been misinterpreted. She clarified that she was influenced, not manipulated. Clara expressed her regret and stated that without outside influence, none of the events would have occurred. She did not seek amnesty but wanted to make it clear she was convinced by the doctors and Anicka's identities. Barbara was absent from the court due to her fear of being handcuffed and locked up. Her lawyer, Richard Novak, read out a statement, alleging that the drowning incident had caused her severe psychological harm, leading her to attempt suicide. Jan Turek called for further investigation into the other factors that may have contributed to the events. Jan Skrlová and Hanna Besova did not appear or exercise their right to speak. On October the 24th, 2008, after 3 days of deliberation, Pavel Goff delivered his verdict on the Kurim case trial. Having considered all of the evidence and testimony, he found all of the defendants guilty of their respective charges. Katerina received the harshest sentence of 10 years, in line with the prosecution's recommendation, due to her apparent role as the instigator and organiser of the abuse of her nephews. Clara's manipulation by Barbara did earn her some leniency, but her perversion of the role of mother was still a heinous crime, resulting in a reduction of only 1 year from Katerina's sentence. She received 9 years of imprisonment. Hanna Besova and Jan Skrlová both received 7-year sentences, while Jan Turek and Barbora Skrlová were sentenced to 5 years in prison. All of the sentences were to be served in maximum security facilities. Despite the conviction of Jacob and Andre's abusers, many questions still remain unanswered. The testimony of the instigators, Katerina and Barbara, lacked credibility, and the theory that abuse was through producing child pornography was deemed unlikely. The investigation found no evidence of such material being produced or distributed outside of Clara's home. During the trial, the involvement of Joseph Skrlov's Grail Movement splinter was closely examined, and former members testified about the sect's inner workings and how Skrlov used Bravanci scout troop to recruit members. Some members resisted the introduction of spirituality, while others became true believers and followed Skrlov to the Grail Movement's headquarters in Austria for a baptismal sealing ceremony. Despite their culture of secrecy, no evidence emerged that members knowingly participated in the abuse or had knowledge of a messianic plan. Those who showed signs of cooperation claimed to have acted on their own without knowledge of a larger plan. Although the indications pointed towards Joseph Skrlová as mastermind behind the abuse, his whereabouts were unknown, and Judge Holub refused to issue a summons without knowing his location. Unfit for Uncovering Organised Crime launched an investigation into other potential abusers but found no evidence of Skrlová's involvement. Nevertheless, the abusers who directly harmed Jacob and Andre were punished, providing some sense of closure and justice for the victims, despite Skrlová potentially evading justice. Now, the Kurim case had significant and long-lasting effects on those involved and the Czech people as a whole. The intense media coverage of the trial was unprecedented, and the case dominated news coverage throughout its various stages, including discovery of abuse, the fiascos with Barbora, and the trial itself. However, the media crossed the line when footage of Andre in the closet was leaked to the public and broadcast uncensored, leading to fines for the stations involved. The Kurim case had far-reaching consequences for several organisations, including the Papskra Daycare Centre, which had employed abusers and supporters, and the Grail Movement, which suffered from its association with Joseph Skrlová during the trial. Jacob and Andre faced significant challenges on their path to recovery, and media coverage of the case made it even more difficult for them. They had to attend school where classmates would sometimes taunt them or show them pictures of their crying mother on the front of newspapers.
Sorry.
These incidents often caused Jacob and Andre to either lash out or break down. However, the brothers received an outpouring of sympathy and support from the Czech people, with anonymous donors sponsoring gifts and trips to the Italian seaside. Despite setbacks, Jacob and Andre made progress in overcoming their fear, distrust and hostility, and their relationship with each other slowly returning to normal. Now, as of this video, the individuals responsible for the abuse of Jacob and Andre have been released and are free. Now, it's uncertain whether they have undergone genuine rehabilitation, and their past actions will continue to haunt them. It's only fitting given the impact they've had on their victims, who are also struggling to move on. And thus ends the mad fucking case of the Kurim case. Let's go on. Quick thoughts.
Quick?
Yeah, quick thoughts.
What the fuck was that?
Exactly.
What the fuck was that? What? I'm left with more questions than I feel were answered. It got a bit Lovecraftian and existential.
And the weird thing is, like, they've all served the sentences. They're all out.
What?
And, it's...
Like, I mean, I think I said to you, like, in one of our, like, sort of breaks...
He needed a piss.
I needed a piss. You needed a piss as well. I needed more pisses because I'm drinking like a fucking horse. But like, how is this not a TV series? Because it's just like fucking...
I know.
It's bizarre.
It's weird as fuck.
I mean, and what's this with this like Grail like fucking cult? It's like splinter faction of another cult.
Yeah, we're going to have to look into it, aren't we?
And it clearly plays quite a fucking role, but everything seems very hush-hush.
I think we're going to have to go down a rabbit hole with this one.
Yeah, I think we are. What the fuck?
I think that sums it up the best.
Like, I'm literally, like... I mean, as our viewers know, I usually, like, interject with the odd cheeky little quip. But through all of this, I was like...
Yeah.
What the fuck?
I think the only way you can describe this is 3 words. What the fuck? It's the strangest case we've ever done. It was weird.
And weird, like, sort of allusions to, like, fucking daycare centres. Like, that's weird. There's so many vibes going on.
I know.
Like, the Pizzagate thing, like...
It's like Pizzagate, but
it is
real.
A bit, but yeah, real and spanning like the fucking northern hemisphere, like from the Czech Republic up to fucking Norway, the most northern civilized outpost.
Yeah. It's
like what the fuck?
Right. So let us know what you think. Do you think what the fuck? Let us know, please. You can reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Email us at enterthedarkpodcast@gmail.com. Please leave a like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you do want like this and you want us to do more stuff like this and you want to support us, you can do for free, like I said, just by clicking like, subscribing.
And if you want to see us go down the rabbit hole of this fucking Grail cult,
it's going to need a lot of books. But if you do want to like chuck us a few, if you're feeling saucy and want to chuck us a few shekels,
yay!
some Czech koruna, you can just go to www.patreon.com/enterthedark. Anything from $1 up to $50. You can bid more than $50, but I'm not putting a tier above $50. But you still get all the free stuff anyway, mugs, t-shirts, and stickers and stuff. It's all cool. But yeah, the names of the patrons should be going up right out now. But yeah.
Wow. Just... Last one in this house.
That was a fitting subject.
That last one in this house to record, and it was a fucking mind blower.
Next time we go, it may sound different, may look different, and also may have him like, oh, thanks, baby. Oh, can you keep it down? Yoko's doing something.
She ain't like that. I mean, Jesus Christ, she's more hardcore than I fucking am.
I know, but I call her Yoko to pretend her to.
It's this fake protect her identity.
I have made her a Yoko Ono mask as well, so that's quite fun. But yeah, thank you for joining us. It's the end of an era from the haunted bedroom, but we're not finishing. We will carry on. I've got to go to dodgy parts of the city, and
it's beautiful. I'll take you up Florence Park. We'll go for a nice walk.
Fucking not going anywhere near Florence Park.
It's beautiful, man. It's where I grew up.
Yeah, I know. Look how you turned out. I've been Jan. He's been Les. Take care. Bye-bye from the haunted bedroom.